So what I'm saying is that a very sophisticated and advanced scientific civilization is a good approximation to God. And it's a way of unifying the sense we have about religion. We would be filled with religious awe when we encounter a technological gadget that we cannot figure out because it's so much more advanced, using physics that we don't know.
Wow. And it seems as though with what's happening across the world, you mentioned the Middle East, you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned political polarization and how the digital realm is influencing organic realm, the real life, and in a bad way most of the times, but also in a good way. It seems that just finding life out there would be the only thing that would unite us at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, a guest who's really looking for the answers to the real profound questions in life and out of this earth, Professor Avi Loeb. So, Professor, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
I am honored to have you here because you really are a big reason why this podcast emerged. One of the biggest questions I'm trying to solve is, through exploring the truth, but the truth about who we are. And that question cannot be answered if we do not look into the stars and out to the stars. And so, Professor, you're the head of the Galileo Project. And for our listeners who are not familiar with the Galileo Project, would you care to share a bit with us more about this endeavor that you run?
Yeah, so this project that I'm leading started about 2.5 years ago. Within a month of the time that the report was submitted by the Director of National Intelligence to the US Congress, basically admitting that the intelligence agencies, the military, identify objects that they cannot figure out, okay? And they don't know what to make of them. And obviously, there are two possibilities. Either they are failing to do their job if these are manufactured by adversarial nations, because the job of the military and the intelligence is to know what other countries are doing and what kind of equipment they're using for espionage. And so either they're failing to do their job, or maybe these objects originated from outside of this earth. And of course, I don't care much about anything produced by humans. It would be boring as far as I'm concerned if Russia or China manufactures some of these objects. What I'm interested in as a scientist, as an astronomer, is what lies outside the solar system. Do we have a neighbor? Is there another civilization that we can learn from, because it will change the future of humanity? And that inspired me to lead the Galileo Project, which is aimed at a systematic study of the sky. So instead of relying on anecdotal reports that come from military personnel that happen to be at the right place at the right time, we are building observatories that monitor the sky all the time with instruments that we have full understanding of, that we calibrate in the optical band, in the infrared, in radio, and in audio. And one of these observatories is already functioning at Harvard University and collecting data. We've looked over the past 2 months at more than 100,000 objects in the sky. We are planning to assemble a copy of this observatory in Colorado, and depending on funding, make more and more observatories like it, so that we can tell systematically, first of all, what are the common objects that are in the sky. They could be birds, natural objects, or they could be balloons, drones, airplanes, objects manufactured by humans. But the fundamental question is whether even 1 out of 1 million might be from outside of this earth. And that's the first branch of the Galileo Project. There is another branch, which is to look for meteors that happen to collide with Earth. A meteor is an object that collides with Earth that originated from outside the solar system. And how can we tell? Well, the flag is that it moves very fast, so fast that it cannot be bound by gravity to the sun. And the first such object was recognized by US government satellites back in 2014, exactly a decade ago. And we know where it exploded as a result of its friction with air, about 20 kilometers over the Pacific Ocean. And we actually went there in an expedition to collect materials left over from this object because it was moving very fast, faster than 95% of the stars near the sun, and moreover had material strength that exceeds all rocks that originated from the solar system in the past. So we thought maybe it's a spacecraft. So in order to find out, we collected materials. We are now in the process of finishing the analysis of those materials. And that's the second branch of the Galileo Project, looking for interstellar meteors. And finally, the third one is looking for interstellar objects that do not collide with Earth, but pass near Earth. That was actually the reason I was intrigued by the possibility that we might be visited by probes from other civilizations, because back in October 2017, an interstellar object the size of a football field was spotted near Earth by a telescope in Hawaii. It was given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And we haven't gotten enough data to figure out its nature, but it did look very different from either asteroids or comets that were previously identified from the solar system. So in order to get much better data, we need to find more interstellar objects like that. And in fact, within a year, there is the Rubin Observatory in Chile that will employ a camera with 3.2 billion pixels. So about 1,000 times more pixels than you have in your cell phone camera.
Wow.
And it will survey the southern sky every 4 days. And it has a good chance of finding an object like Oumuamua every month. So together with the members of the Galileo Project, I plan to identify those objects, study them in much greater detail than we studied the Oumuamua. In particular, the Webb telescope can help us figure out the size of the object, the temperature of the object from its infrared emission, the heat that is emitted from it. And we can also pinpoint the trajectory of such objects very precisely to tell if they're propelled by anything other than gravity. So these are the three branches of the Galileo Project. And, altogether, it's a path that was not taken before in research, scientific research. And as a result, there is a chance that we will find some low-hanging fruits because nobody did that before.
Wow, that is quite an endeavor and a project. And you touch on a lot of topics that I want to cover, but I think the first one is, Professor, you have quite a background. You've been the director of the Institute of Theory and Computation at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. You've also led the Black Hole Initiative. If I dare to say, you're one of the most brilliant guests I had in the show. And your interest has pivoted into finding life out there, or finding interstellar lives or objects. And so I think the core question that I have for you is, when was that moment in your trajectory where you said, I have to focus on this. No one is looking for this. I have to really... When did your curiosity really peaked and you said, I'm going to focus my endeavors on this journey?
My interest was triggered primarily by the discovery of Oumuamua, which was the first report about an interstellar object. And before that, nobody talked about interstellar objects. Now, as a young kid growing up on a farm in Israel, I was mostly interested in philosophy, and circumstances brought me to astrophysics. And as an astronomer, I worked primarily about how the first stars and galaxies formed in the universe. Now it's a very exciting topic because of data from the Webb telescope. And when I started working, there were very few people around the world that were interested. So I actually pioneered this subject, wrote 2 textbooks about it, and had tens of students and postdocs working on it. And then I also, as you mentioned, founded the Black Hole Initiative, where the first image of a black hole, the shadow of a black hole, was taken in 2019. I was chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for almost a decade, 9 years. And so I worked in all aspects of theoretical astrophysics, wrote more than 1,000 papers, but as a result of the discovery of Oumuamua, I was intrigued because it didn't look like the typical rocks we find in the solar system. So I suggested maybe it's artificial in origin, maybe it's technological. And what I noticed is that, as soon as the subject received some traction, I mean, initially when I suggested that, many of my colleagues were excited about the possibility, but then when the public's attention started to rise, there was pushback from the scientific community to this subject. And I found that to be quite unfortunate because, here is an example of a topic that the public cares a lot about, that the taxpayers are excited about, and for some reason it's being neglected within the mainstream of astronomy. And so I decided to dedicate more of my time to it because it's one of these unusual circumstances where when you realize that that something is being missed by the scientific community. And of course, the key in gaining new knowledge is to collect evidence. So even though I'm a theoretical astrophysicist, I'm leading an experimental project, the Galileo Project. And moreover, I went to the Pacific Ocean to collect materials because nobody else would do that. And I should say that there is still a lot of pushback within the scientific community, but my hope is either as a result of us finding evidence that cannot be denied, or because it becomes clear that the US government has some unusual data or materials, the subject will gain much more traction. And there is some risk in working on this because you never know what you will discover. You are exploring the unknown, but that's what makes it exciting.
Wow, no, it does, and we'll get into the profound questions that you will address in your book Interstellar later on. I know that philosophy is one, if not the biggest, topics regarding life out there. What will it mean for our lives, our conception of who we are, of religion? So we'll get to that, Professor. But it's really important to address a few things that you touched on now. Why you've mentioned a couple of times the Oumuamua, the scout. What is it about the Oumuamua that was so shocking for you that said, you know what, I have to invest my energies in it? What is it really? Is it an alien craft? Did you notice something different? Can you discuss with our listeners about those findings that you saw? Why did you receive so much pushback on it? And then we'll get into the questions about evidence and also the role of government.
Right. So first of all, the actual existence, the discovery of Oumuamua was very surprising because I wrote a paper a decade before that, which was the first paper to forecast how many rocks we should expect from other stars that would enter the solar system from outside. Based on what we know about the solar system, there were rocks ejected from the solar system, and we can do some estimates of, in total, if you assume conditions like the ones found in the solar system around other stars, how many, and we calculated that this telescope in Hawaii, Pan-STARRS, should not find any. And then Oumuamua was discovered, and it was, in order to explain it as a rock, you need an abundance of rocks that is hundreds to 100 million times more than you expect from a solar system like conditions around every other star. And so that was surprising to me. And when you realize that your previous expectation is wrong, it's an opportunity to learn something new. Actually, I'm more excited when my predictions do not come true, because then it's nature's way of telling you that you're missing something. And so still, I thought, okay, well, it's probably a rock. But the people who discovered it already pointed out in the discovery notes that they wrote that, in fact, the brightness of this object is changing by a factor of 10 as it's tumbling every 8 hours. And that implies, since we're talking about reflection of sunlight, which is simply the brightness is proportional to the area of the object in the sky that is intercepting sunlight and reflecting it in our direction. So if the object is tumbling and the brightness changes by a factor of 10, it means that the area of the object is changing by a factor of 10. And that is very unusual, because previously in the solar system, variations were up to a factor of 3. So the object must have a very extreme shape. Just think about a piece of paper tumbling in the wind. Even though it's very thin, that piece of paper, it's very unlikely for it to be exactly edge-on. So if you want the area projected in front of you of that piece of paper to change by a factor of 10, you really need it to have a very flat shape. And then there was another unusual fact about it, that and that actually convinced me that it cannot be simple, the explanation for what its origin is. And that was that it was pushed away from the sun. There was an excess force acting on it, in addition to the force of gravity. And that was a repulsive force pushing it away. But there was no evaporation. No gas was found, no dust was found around it as a result of very deep observations with the Spitzer Space Telescope. They couldn't find any carbon-based molecules around it. And usually the way that you can push an object is by the rocket effect, when it evaporates and the evaporating gases push it forward. And if they go backwards, just like a jet plane is being pushed or a rocket is being pushed. And since there was nothing evaporating from it, the question is, what is pushing it? And the only explanation that I could think of that seemed natural to me is the reflection of sunlight from it, being the force that is pushing it. But for that, the object had to be very thin, just like the example of the piece of paper we were talking about. And indeed, we are working, NASA is working on using sails, light sails that are pushed by reflecting light, and to propel an object. And so the only problem is nature doesn't make very thin membranes. And so I suggested, well, if that is the explanation, then it should be potentially artificial. So that, and then on top of that, there was the origin of this object. It was at rest in the local frame of the Milky Way galaxy, which is called the local standard of rest. And stars are moving relative to that frame. The sun is moving relative to that frame. And this object was almost at rest in that frame. So the solar system was just like a giant ship that bumped into Oumuamua, which was at rest like a buoy on the surface of the ocean. And the question is, why would it be at rest when, only 1 in 500 stars was so much at rest? And so altogether, the fact that it was not propelled by evaporation, there was no jittery motion that you often see for comets that evaporate, and moreover, that it had such an extreme flat shape, suggested to me that it's not a rock. And of course, we didn't get enough data. We didn't have an image of it, but I just put forward this possibility because we have to leave it on the table. And the pushback was, of course, to say, well, it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And so one suggestion was that it's a dust bunny, a collection of dust particles 100 times less dense than air, that are being pushed like a cloud of dust, very rarefied. And the problem is that such an object would not survive coming close to the sun because it will get heated by hundreds of degrees. Then there was a suggestion, maybe it's a hydrogen iceberg, something we've never seen, made of hydrogen. And then when the hydrogen evaporates, it's transparent, we can't see it, so there is a rocket effect. And then the problem with that is that it wouldn't survive the journey in interstellar space. So another group suggested maybe it's a nitrogen iceberg made of pure nitrogen, like the surface of Pluto, but there are just not enough Pluto-like planets to account for a large enough population of such objects, nitrogen-based. So it remains a puzzle. And obviously, cave dwellers that find a cell phone would at first think that the cell phone is a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And I'm just like the kid of the cave dwellers that says, let me look at it more carefully. Maybe, if you press a button, it might do something different than a rock. And it's just like the kid in Hans Christian Andersen's tale who looked at the emperor and said the emperor is naked. The emperor has no clothes. And all the adults in the room said, what do you mean? The emperor has clothes. You just can't see them. And in this case, the clothes are the evaporating gases from Oumuamua.
Wow. That story is quite intriguing and also piques curiosity. And like you say, Professor, I think the biggest foundation for science is to have curiosity on our surroundings, not just, for example, this is funny, but I don't really know what a rainbow is. I can read about it on Wikipedia, but when I see a rainbow, now that I read on it on Wikipedia, I just, another rainbow. But we have normalized seeing rainbows, which are awe-striking, are beautiful, and are just a unique aspect of our existence, of the universe, of planet Earth. And seeing a potentially foreign meteor or foreign interstellar driven machine or artifact or whatever Oumuamua was, should have, I dare to say, should not have been drawn with such skepticism, or rather a curious skepticism, like a picked, right. So let's, like you say.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing, that only over the past decade we found the first objects from outside the solar system, and they look weird, both the meteor that I mentioned before and the Oumuamua. So we should be open-minded, because what is there to lose by being curious and studying these objects? I mean, we already know that 83% of the matter in the universe is a substance that we've never seen in the solar system. We call it dark matter. And so it's clear that there are things outside the solar system that look different than what we find inside. We just need to be curious and open-minded. But for example, on the day that I came back from the expedition, there was a paper published in the Astrophysical Journal where two astronomers were saying the government measured the speed of this meteor incorrectly. It's actually 3 times smaller, and moreover, it came from the solar system, because otherwise we cannot fit it with our model for stones. And I call that the Stone Age of science, where you say the data must be wrong if it doesn't fit my model for stones. I mean, if we argue the dark matter was made of stones, and therefore the data is incorrect because we just cannot explain the data with stones, nobody would pay attention to that, because we all know from a lot of directions that there is matter different from ordinary matter, and it's not made of stones. So in the context of objects, why should we always insist that what we find coming from the cosmic street is made of the same material, the same production process as the rocks that we find in our backyard? I mean, this is a very narrow-minded approach. And, we went to the expedition, we actually found the materials. So as a result of that, now some people say, well, these were made by humans. The materials you found were coal ash. And coal ash is very well defined. We know exactly the composition of coal ash. And we actually, recently, over the past few weeks, we compared 60 elements in the periodic table for the special type of materials we found near this interstellar meteor path to coal ash, and there is huge difference, when you look at the detailed comparison. But and I should say, the people who suggested coal ash, they didn't have access to the material. So then you ask yourself, why would they waste the time of reporters? Because they spoke to reporters who reported it as if case solved. The materials found were coal ash. Why would they do that? Why would they put time and effort to saying things that are just incorrect without any direct evidence? They don't have access to the materials we have. We are doing the detailed work. It was a year to plan the expedition, 6 months to do the detailed analysis with all these 60 elements from the periodic table. So they could have just waited and, as a sign of generosity of mind, just wait for us to tell them what is the composition that we find. But instead, they are rushing into negative comments, and it shows you the motivation, which is really unfortunate. One of these people actually contacted students and postdocs in my research team, to tell them his strong opinion that it's coal ash, they should not work on it. And I find that very aggressive and inappropriate. And it's too bad, because if science is being diminished by people, by scientists that pretend to protect science this way, I mean, in the long run, they will be remembered as the people who hurt science, because they're suppressing the way science should be done, which is without any prejudice, going for the evidence and analyzing it, which takes time and effort. But they don't want to invest the time, yet they want to make negative comments. And it's really distressing to see that, scientists pretending to be protectors of science, but never, what they're doing is actually harming science.
Yeah, some people are treating science as a religion and as an ideology, which is quite frightening. And you've also written extensively in your blog, in your Medium blog. A few days back, you wrote on what's happening in our college campuses, especially in yours, professor, in Harvard. And it's scary that, science has been the cornerstone of advancement, and now it's being used as a weapon for thought. And that's concerning. But Professor, I wanted to address a huge idea that you just said, which is, what is there to lose if we explore? And just before we started recording, Professor, I created a YouTube poll on my channel, asking, how do you think finding or interacting with alien life would change humanity? And the results are very, very striking. So less than 10% as of right now said that it would be extremely positive. Most of the people said it would be mixed between positive and negative, and almost pretty much everyone else said it would be catastrophic. And so I know, knowing your work and me understanding your background and who you are as a person and how you write about these ideas of interstellar, you would be you would have answered optimist, you would answer positive, extremely positive. So I would like for you to address that. But on the other hand, why are so many of us really, and when you ask us what is there to lose, they would answer pretty much everything. It would be a catastrophic event to find aliens.
Well, this is very interesting, because all that you are asking is something about the unknown, okay? So we don't know. I mean, we are completely ignorant as to, what our neighbor might be, let's put it that way. And it's an interesting psychological question as to why people imagine nightmare scenarios rather than positive scenarios. Why is there a tendency? And of course, you can see that also in terms of the interaction of people with each other on social media. Hate and tribalism fuels much of social media. And it's as if, we are responding to an urge that resulted from our evolution, that, we used to associate ourselves with a tribe. In this case, it's humanity. Humanity is our tribe, but in many cases, it's much smaller tribe. For example, if you are on the left. You will establish your tribe of the left. If you are on the right, a tribe of the right. That's still, let's say, half of the population within the US. But then you can go to smaller tribes than that. And on any question, you can associate yourself with a group of people that thinks alike. And why are we doing that? Well, that's by itself is not so bad unless it was used in order to hate members of the other tribe. So in this case, here you see that tendency in the context of humanity. We feel that we are part of the human tribe, and we feel hostility towards or from anyone that does not belong to that tribe without even meeting those. And of course, during human evolution, it served an important purpose because resources were limited, were scarce. So obviously, if you have access to food, you may, take it away from another tribe that wants to get the same food. Or in terms of territories, we still see that within, the regional conflict in the Middle East, within Ukraine. It's all about territories. And territory is limited, and if one side gets it, the other side loses it. So it's a zero-sum game. So when we are trained in zero-sum games, then we tend to always worry about anyone that doesn't belong to our tribe taking some of the resources that are limited. And unfortunately, that is causing all the turmoil that we find in human history. And all of the damage to humanity is triggered by feelings of hate towards members of another tribe. It's really unfortunate. And here we have an opportunity for something completely different, because we're not talking about the resources on Earth. There is much more real estate beyond Earth. If you just think about all the stars in the sky that you look at, of the Milky Way galaxy, it has hundreds of billions of stars like the sun, and a significant fraction of them, somewhere between a few percent to maybe most of them, have a planet like the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So there is a huge amount of real estate out there and resources out there, and yet people fear that if we have a neighbor, the neighbor would really want to take our own resources, and there would be hostility, and we will be a threat to that neighbor. The way I see it is very differently. If they are able to reach our doorstep, you have to realize that the nearest star is 4 light years away, and a typical star in the Milky Way galaxy is tens of thousands of light years away. So even if you move at the speed of light, to cross the Milky Way galaxy takes tens of thousands of years. And if you use rockets of the type that we used so far for space exploration, and that includes Starship that is being built right now by SpaceX, those rockets move at a speed that is 10,000 times slower than the speed of light. So to move from one side of the galaxy to the other side takes almost 1 billion years. 1 billion years for that journey. It's a major engineering undertaking to traverse the distances between stars. So if you imagine a neighbor reaching us, long before we were able to reach that neighbor, it means that the neighbor is far more sophisticated, ahead of us, started developing science and technology and launching spacecraft well before we did. We started doing it only over the past century. And just imagine another civilization that did it for 1,000 years, for 10,000 years. They would be far more advanced than we are. Also, since the journey takes a long time, they didn't have us in mind when they embarked on a journey towards Earth, because we were indistinguishable from nature if you go back more than 10,000 years ago. Therefore, if they arrive here, it's not because of us. We tend to think everything is centered on us, and people come, visitors come here just because they know what is happening here. No, that's not the case, because the journey is so long and they are so much more sophisticated, they wouldn't care much about us. And it's actually an opportunity for us to learn about future technologies that they possess, and it would take us a long time to develop ourselves. So for us, it will be a learning experience, and I see it as in a very positive way. We probably resemble, ants on the cracks of a pavement. When a biker passes by, the biker doesn't really care much about us. And, it's clear that we are not that important, because humans came to exist on Earth only over the past few million years, okay? And at first, of course, they looked just like animals. And a few million years is only one part in a few thousand of the age of the Earth, okay? So it's just at the end of the history. And moreover, the Earth itself is not at the center of the universe. We know that. So if you arrive to a cosmic play and you are not at the center of stage, and you are also arriving at the end of the play is not about you. And yet we keep thinking about it as if it's all about us. No, it's not. We are insignificant. I mean, we just developed modern science over the past 100 years. Quantum mechanics was discovered a century ago. And all the gadgets that we use right now to communicate, the two of us are speaking through electronics that relies on quantum mechanics. This was not possible more than a century ago. And just think about what would happen a century from now or 1,000 years from now in terms of our development. They may have already done that. And as a result, I see it more as a way of us to learn, to appreciate. In fact, if we meet a technological gadget that is so much more sophisticated than what we possess, it will appear to us like a miracle. In the Old Testament, in the Bible, there is this story about Moses witnessing a burning bush that was not consumed. And of course, nowadays, we could have bought such an electric device and put it in front of Moses back then, and Moses would have been struck and would have believed that it was produced by a superhuman entity. That's what convinced Moses that God exists. But if I were next to Moses using the Galileo Project instruments, I would have been able to tell what the temperature of the bush is, how much energy is emitted per time, and figure out whether indeed it's manufactured by some advanced civilization. And so what I'm saying is that a very sophisticated and advanced scientific civilization is a good approximation to God. And it's a way of unifying the sense we have about religion. We would be filled with religious awe when we encounter a technological gadget that we cannot figure out because it's so much more advanced, using physics that we don't know.
Wow. And it seems as though with what's happening across the world, you mentioned the Middle East, you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned political polarization and how the digital realm is influencing organic realm, the real life, and in a bad way most of the times, but also in a good way. It seems that just finding life out there, it would be the only thing that would unite us at this point.
Yeah,
it would be
that's exactly what I think. In the Judeo-Christian religions, there is this notion of the Messiah. The idea is the Messiah will bring peace to earth. The Jews believe that it will happen in the future. The Christians believe that it already happened once, the Messiah arrived, but then the Messiah will come back again. And by the way, the philosopher Martin Buber said, why argue? Let's just wait. Both religions agree that the Messiah will arrive. When the Messiah arrives, we can ask whether there was a previous visit or not. But my view, in difference, for example, from the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn that believes the Messiah will arrive from Brooklyn, I think that most likely it will arrive from extraterrestrial origin, from some other star, because if we do realize that there is a much more advanced culture or civilization out there, it would basically diminish our ego. That's what happens in religion. And a lot of people that believe in God realize that there is an entity out there so much more superior to them that their ego is not as important. Okay, and once we diminish the motivation associated with our ego, then it would, we will all come together, because the fights that we have with each other is all about gaining access to territory, to resources, just to empower our ego. We always want to feel superior relative to members of another tribe. And that is also the reason that when you did your poll, that everyone was afraid that the other tribe, the aliens, will come to, will damage our ego, because they will come to take away something from us. But there is another possibility that they don't care about us at all. They are so much superior to us that we do not even count. And in that case, we would feel as equal members of the human species, because relative to something so much more advanced, the differences between us are completely insignificant. And that's my hope, that it will unite us.
When I started, thinking about this interview, Professor, I was, thinking whether or not I would fit into what side of the equation, your optimistic view or a catastrophic one. And now I have a third one, which is they being so intelligent, the aliens being so intelligent and so superior than us, and just they would look at us as ants and just shrug their arms, and they're like, oh, okay, never mind, and just pass away, and we will never contact them. That's a new fear that I've unlocked.
Well, it's possible. We should see it as a compliment if there is a visitor coming to visit us, because, if you imagine tourist agencies or real estate agencies that are interstellar, then that are looking at properties on other stars and on other planets, if they come to visit us, it's a compliment, and we should be kind to visitors because they can tell us things that we don't know about our environment. So, hospitality was very much appreciated in ancient Greece. It was a very high value, because the ancient Greeks realized that the visitors bring new knowledge. So I see it exactly the same way. For example, I once saw a person on the street next to my home, looking at our home, and my wife was saying, why is that person staring at our home for so long? And I went to him and I asked him, why are you looking at our home? And he said, well, I used to live at this place 50 years ago. And then he said, in the backyard, we buried a cat named Tiger. And I said, well, the name sounds familiar, because I saw a rock where the title Tiger was printed on it. And, I obviously thought that it might be a tiger. I didn't dig down, but we went there, and he said, yeah, that's the place. And so, the fact that I met this stranger allowed me to learn something new about the history of my backyard. And the same could be true for us. Even though the solar system is familiar, we were not around a billion years ago. And perhaps they have much more knowledge about the cosmic neighborhood around us that we can benefit from. They can tell us what happened before the Big Bang, maybe, if they have an understanding of how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity. So I have two questions, actually, if I ever get to meet or encounter aliens. The first question is, what happened before the Big Bang? Because it will, on the one hand, inform us about our cosmic roots, where we came from, but will also inform us about how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, which is one of the major challenges in physics right now, and an unsolved problem. But the second question that I'll have is, where is the nearest bar where aliens socialize, because I would like to meet them.
Me too, but I have to be honest, Professor. I think that while being optimistic myself and thinking rationally about the possibility of interacting, drinking a beer with a fellow alien and them talking to me about their challenges on their everyday life, that's a rational, good idea. But in my heart, Professor, I have to be honest. I'm thinking about the place where we are as a society, and also me individually, and all of the turmoil that's happening around the world. And are we prepared to encounter an alien species? And also, continuing on that question that we addressed already, what is there to lose if I'm not prepared psychologically to face aliens? Which also deviates to another tangent, which we'll have to address later on, which is the US government in this whole equation, what is happening there. But if I'm not ready to engage with them, how will I not trigger my evolutionary code, which is drop a nuke on them? Oumuamua is coming real fast to us. Just fire everything that we have onto them. Let's not engage with them. And what will that impact, my 9 to 5 life, my
Right.
schedule? Are we ready for that, Professor?
Well, first of all, I should comment that 4 centuries ago, we were not ready to the news that we are not at the center of the universe, right? That's why Galileo Galilei was put in house arrest by the church. He was sentenced so that nobody would listen to what he has to say, as if that will change reality. The point is, he just looked through his telescope and saw the moons of Jupiter, and that convinced him that not everything is moving around the Earth because the moons were moving around Jupiter. It's a very simple point. And the fact that the church put him in house arrest did not change what he was seeing. Okay. And just think about the possibility that we would still insist that we are at the center of the world. Everything moves around us, including Mars. And then NASA would launch rockets towards Mars to visit there, and they will never reach their destination because we have the wrong model of the reality that surrounds us. That's a very bad thing so, denying that we have neighbors is a very bad approach by not looking. It's just like putting your head in the sand or closing the windows, not checking if you have neighbors. That's not a good approach. It's much better to check out if we have neighbors. And with respect to the response, if we become violent when we notice any visits, I think that's actually a good test of our intelligence. If we are not that intelligent to be curious and learn from something that is far more advanced than we are, and we respond violently to that, you can think about an alligator opening his mouth and, trying to eat anything that swims nearby. And, that's not an intelligent approach. And, at the end, irrespective of what we do here on Earth, the sun will boil off all the oceans on Earth. And if we keep insisting that we are alone and we should stay on Earth and there is nothing else to go to, and then we will go through extinction. I mean, the Earth will become a desert, just like Mars. And presumably, a lot of planets that had conditions similar to the Earth went through that already, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun. And by now, they evolved to a state where if you had a habitable planet like the Earth, it was burned up by the evolution of the star. So there must have been a lot of tragedies which do not reflect a high intelligence. So civilizations that did not leave their planet, that did not learn about how other civilizations can cope with those threats, they went to extinction. And you can think of this as the Darwinian principle of the fittest survives. What does that mean? It means that those civilizations that are not intelligent enough just die. They perish on their planet it could be through wars, it could be by changing the climate as a result of their activities, It could be by being hostile, by not learning from those who manage to survive those risks, existential risks. It doesn't really matter. But to be the fittest, to survive, you need to be intelligent enough to learn from those who survive, to learn the lesson of survival. And for me, given the fact that there are billions or tens of billions of other stars like the sun that already went through this history that we are about to go through, there is a very good chance that there were civilizations that were under existential threats. And those that survived those threats are the good students in our class. They are the smart neighbors that we can learn from. If we are not willing to learn from them and just showing hostility, then we demonstrated that we should not survive. We demonstrated that we are not the fittest, because we cannot really be friendly to learn from those that are smarter than us. And the end result would be that, humanity will not exist eventually. And that's just like in nature, the Darwinian principle. There are lots of species that didn't survive because they didn't adapt to the reality that keeps changing. And for us, currently on Earth, it's very comfortable, but, eventually it will not be. And so we will need to go somewhere else. And if other civilizations did that already, why not learn from them how to do it so that you can survive? I mean, that's the intelligent thing to do.
I'm hoping that at least the smartest students in the classroom are also open-minded and are willing to share with us their secret recipe, because like you just said right now, Professor, and how you write in Interstellar, I'm quoting you, "For at the highest rung of the cosmic ladder of civilizations, there is no dark, there is no ordinary, there is only fulfillment of a sacred trust, continuance." And what you're saying right now is that pretty much engaging with that alien species would guarantee at least a pathway towards our continuation. And I think on that sense, Professor, my question is, how do we ensure, again, with what's happening across the world right now, it does seem like, I'm sorry, but the world does seem like it's on fire, at least the perception of it. It's unfortunate, but are we worthy of getting to another planet? How will Alex, if I'm part of your roster, says, "Alex, you're going to Mars," how will I ensure that my evolutionary code won't hijack, my need or desire to just mess up another planet? How do we ensure that, Professor?
Well, we don't have a guarantee, but we can do our best. And frankly, I'm very troubled by the hate and the tribalism that become more and more prominent in our world. I mean, people say that, this time is so much better than it used to be, than society used to be a century ago, 2 centuries ago. But the difference is that we now have the ability to globally destroy ourselves. These abilities did not exist more than a century ago. There were no nuclear weapons, and if those go to the hands of terrorists, it will be very damaging. And also pandemics. We just saw the one that of COVID-19, and there is a possibility that it came from gain-of-function experiments. This possibility is played down by governments because they prefer to advocate the idea that it came from nature, but it's not at all obvious. And you can imagine a much more damaging future pandemic that could result from experimentation by humans. And artificial intelligence could potentially be used by bad players in a very damaging way, in particular to enhance hate and tribalism. It's already being used on social media for that purpose. So there are many, reasons to be concerned, but I'm an optimist because I believe that sometimes life is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we need to have a vision that is positive. That will be the recipe for our survival if we have a positive. So what would be my message? Well, first of all, we see on campuses now tribalism. And that results from the fact that universities are subscribing to a political agenda. Okay? So if a university subscribes to one side of the political map, and it doesn't really matter if it's the left or the right, it doesn't really matter, because then what they do by that is first make the intellectual atmosphere uncomfortable for half of the nation, that belongs to the other tribe, so to speak, of the political map. And secondly, when things happen that put a lot of stress on the university, such as a political event of the type that happened on October 7th, that stress test creates even more tension, because now the university sides with one side, and then politicians in Washington, D.C., or other members of society would try to, would find the position of the university unacceptable and create a lot of tension. So my first advice is for university campuses to attend to what the so-called Calvin report from the University of Chicago, which basically said that a university should engage in scholarly work. And the way I phrase it as a scientist is that the laws of physics can be discovered equally well by Republicans and Democrats. It really doesn't matter what your political view is, because the way that electrons, atoms, molecules, radiation behave has nothing to do with your political beliefs. So there is a lot of scholarly work that can be pursued. And once you mix a political agenda with excellence in research, excellence in scholarly work, when you judge people in academia by evaluating their political standing instead of evaluating their scholarship, it's very dangerous, because you are basically creating an instability that would diminish the role of academia in society. And and now I want to bring it to the next level, which is to say that academia can help remove the hate within society by basically trying to look for ways of engaging in dialogues and bringing people with different opinions to speak with each other, so that we can all identify some common ground. And that should be actually the role of academia, to bring people together with different opinions. And I call that diversity of opinions. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. The FIRE organization evaluated that, for example, in terms of freedom of speech and academic freedom, Harvard ranks last among colleges, which is really bad. I mean, so people advocate freedom of speech, but only for those who agree with them. And that goes against the principle of engaging in dialogues with those who do not agree with you. And you want to also understand those people from the other side, where they come from, and maybe they have a good point, So the tolerance of accepting members of other tribes, I think, should originate from campuses rather than the other way around, where right now campuses are on one side of the political spectrum, and as a result, they create even more tension, more polarization. So the way I see it is, if humans, people, would give up on the idea of hating members of another tribe. And by the way, it will have the side effect of not hating aliens as well, right? Because we are all members of the tribe of humanity, and we should accept those who are different from us. So, it was all summarized. I was at dinner a couple of months ago where the curator of the Museum of Modern Art, her name is Paula Antonelli, summarized it in 3 words. And that was after General Patreus, who was also in that dinner, made his assessment for the future of the Middle East following the October 7th war. And she said, love the aliens. And the way I understand it is, you should love or respect those who are different than you are. So that goes both in terms of healing the wounds within our society, but also, from my perspective, it goes also to staying curious and willing to engage with aliens and search and put money into the search for neighbors, cosmic neighbors. The evidence will not fall into our lap. Elon Musk keeps saying, I saw him giving a speech just today saying, I haven't seen any evidence. Well, of course, because you are not doing focused research using telescopes to search for those aliens. You really need to invest money in the facilities that would allow you to see them. Just like we invest, billions of dollars in the Large Hadron Collider, smashing particles to find new particles. It's getting new knowledge requires a lot of money, a lot of effort. And so when people say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, I say extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary funding. So it's actually the Elon Musk who should say, let's put money into looking for aliens, because it's a fundamental question that is so important and so exciting. Instead of him saying, well, I look around, I don't see anything. That is not really the approach that science is adopting in finding new knowledge.
Wow, Professor, thank you. Thank you for that answer. And I'm embracing a lot of your ideas, because like you say, the externality of being kind to one another pretty much can make us graduate from this Earth to another one to another planet in a better way, and embrace aliens in a good way. And Professor, I know we're getting short on time. I have just a couple of more questions. And one is regarding what you just addressed right now, funding. And that brings us into this really weird conversation that's been around the US government's role in finding UAVs, UFOs, UAPs, all of these things. And I think that the question that I have for you, Professor, is why would the role of the US government be to make everything murky, everything just opaque and weird when it comes to this conversation of aliens? What is their incentive with doing this on one hand, and on the other, what is happening within the US government when it comes to funding and trying to discover these and answer these big questions about who we are?
Yeah, so first of all, the US government monitors the sky and the US territory all the time for national security purposes. Okay, so they would be the first to notice something unusual. Astronomers are looking at a small portion of the sky, and if something flies overhead, they would ignore it. So that is the reason that maybe the US government has data, materials, the way that David Grush was testifying under oath before Congress in July 2023. And I had spent more than an hour speaking with David Grush last month, and he says that he cannot provide details publicly, even though he argues that the government has programs like that. And I had a visitor to my home from Lockheed Martin. I mean, it's possible that some of these materials are were shared with corporations. And when I asked that person that used to be at Lockheed Martin, I said, is what David Grush, does it make any sense to you, what he said? And is it possible that Lockheed Martin has materials at its possession from such programs? And he said, it's not necessarily wrong. And I was surprised. I expected him to dismiss it. Now, if indeed such materials or information was delivered to corporations outside government, it could explain why only a few people know about it within government, and also explain why we are not made aware, because those corporations are being paid by government, and they will keep it unresolved for a long time. They don't necessarily have the best scientists to help them figure it out. So it's the same relationship as you have between a patient and a psychiatrist, where the psychiatrist never solves the problems because the patient pays money. So it's possible that there is something like that. And if there is, my point is anything that came from outside the solar system should be shared with scientists like myself, because it's my day job to figure out these things, whereas the government is supposed to focus its attention on anything that belongs to this earth, anything that is human-made. And it's really inappropriate for them to withhold information like that. And so my hope, I mean, I don't know if there is any such material or information, but if there is, I very much hope that they will share it with scientists like myself, and we will know more in the coming year or two.
Yeah, it's a weird role that they've put themselves in, or at least how we perceive them as the gatekeepers of this.
Yeah, but for me, it's also the fact that if they have already that information, I'm working to retrieve it myself. It would take me decades within the Galileo Project. And so it would be a waste of my time to do that. If they already have something of that nature, I would like to see it. It will just, I would very much be thrilled to help them figure it out. So that's my motivation, to ask them to declassify it, to release it, and maybe it will happen. We shall see.
We shall see, and we, at least, our listeners will try to do our part in trying to help that connection happen in our ways. And Professor, there are so many questions I have still here with you. I'm hoping that we could address them in another conversation. I think the last question that I have for you for this edition is, what question do you think aliens would ask us if they come to Earth?
It really depends what they already know, right? And also it depends on whether there are biological creatures coming to visit us. It's possible it will only be AI systems, technological gadgets that use artificial intelligence. I mean, if they ask us a question and the AI systems are so much more advanced than what we know, then they would just ask us those questions to basically test what we think and how we think, rather than gain some information, because they are so much more sophisticated. They can figure us out very quickly. So, if something really advanced is in front of us, I would be suspicious. They might use our answers to learn more about the way we think, and realize, okay, they are that naive, this is the way we should speak with them, or this is the way we should interact with them. It will be more of lowering their level of intelligence to our level. So just to calibrate, it's just like giving a test. We might have the same sense when we interact with future, artificial intelligence systems that we create. For example, imagine ChatGPT 10. Even that by itself might be so much more intelligent than we are, simply because it has more connections and more knowledge than our brain, that it would manipulate us. We would think that it's actually asking us questions to learn something, but in fact, it's asking us questions in order to use the information about the way we, our conception is such that it could calibrate how to fool us or how to play with us. And that's usually the case when there is an oracle that is far more advanced. I would never imagine this oracle asking us questions to gain knowledge about, but only to figure out where we are relative to the much more advanced level that oracle is at.
Wow, I've never thought about it that way. And you mentioned artificial intelligence, and one of my questions, I know we're very short on time, but one of my questions I was hoping to ask you is, I've been thinking of AI, and of course you've also been addressing AI in your writings and also in previous podcast appearances. And I think that, I would love to hear your perspective on this, but I've been thinking on this thought experiment that perhaps our kindergarten, or at least our, how to learn to ride a bicycle in terms of speaking with an alien would be once we get to AGI or we train with AI. So it would be like a stepping stone. Do you see this possibility of AI helping us, another externality that we don't see, we're not foreseeing to prepare us to engage with aliens?
Definitely, because if we encounter, for example, artificial intelligence from another planet, from an extraterrestrial origin, then we will use our own AI system to figure it out. Just the way that Alan Turing cracked the enigma with computers. So the only thing that, in fact, our AI systems might feel kinship to extraterrestrial AI systems more than to us, because they might resemble them. And there will be a twist on Alan Turing's imitation game. Instead of our own AI systems imitating us, they will imitate extraterrestrial AI systems. And that could bring us to a completely new domain of the evolution of AI. It's not at all clear to me that the humans are playing a major role in the future of our development on Earth. It might well be in the AGI domain, and I have no problem with that. If our technological kids are superior to us, I'm not offended, because I'm very proud of my daughters when they outperform me. And so I would be very proud of our technological kids if they help us. And one way they can help us is also in exploring space, because if you send a spacecraft to a large distance, like an interstellar destination, it takes a long time. And also it's very difficult for that probe to communicate with us in real time because of the large distance, and to send us a lot of information. So it's just like sending off your kid to the world. You don't expect the kid to report back at every instant, and the kid has their own brain, and they can decide for themselves what to do under changing circumstances. And then the kid sends a postcard every now and then with a summary of the most exciting encounters. And in that way, across large distances, it's the best path forward. We haven't yet employed artificial intelligence in space. So I think that would be a major frontier in the future. I hope so.
Wow. Professor, I'm sure we could stay for throughout the entire day speaking. I'm hoping to host you again soon. I know that our guests, our listeners will really enjoy this conversation, and I hope that they embrace your optimistic perspective on finding life out there and what would that mean for us in here. And so, Professor, thank you so much for joining me. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me, and anyone interested can find my routine essays on medium.com, Avi Loeb at medium.com. You can follow my work over there.
Absolutely. I will add everything on this episode's information, and I myself read your articles, and so I appreciate those. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks for having me.